Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As you join, we ask that you remain muted and disable your video to avoid any disruptions during today's event. This is Unlocking Ownership Capital, a conversation on innovation, capital, and power. Our speakers will engage each other throughout today's program, and we won't have a traditional Q&A session. So we ask that if you do have a question for our speakers, please place them in the chat. We plan to have a robust conversation there. And as you join, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know your name, what organization you're from, what business you represent, or where you're joining us from in the country. I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our speakers. We have a great set of presenters today, starting with Todd Leverette. Todd is a founding partner at Apis and Heritage Capital Partners, an investment firm incubated at DAWI to address the most pressing issue facing business owners of color and workers who are locked out of business ownership opportunities, and that's access to capital. Todd was previously the program manager of DAWI's legacy business initiatives, where he worked with business owners, economic developers, and community members to expand the world of employee ownership. We're also joined by Jeanne Wardford. Jeanne is a program officer for family economic security at the Kellogg Foundation. She is an accomplished economic development professional with a proven track record of leadership, innovation, and performance. In her current role at Kellogg, she's led an investment portfolio that has resulted in leveraging close to $300 billion in community benefit agreements. We're also joined by Khatib. Kate is a co-director at Seed Commons, as well as co-founder and worker owner of Red Emma's, a cooperatively owned restaurant and bookstore in Baltimore that has helped to catalyze a citywide ecosystem of worker-owned businesses for over the last decade. In 2015, Kate helped to found the Seed Commons Cooperative and its Baltimore peer, the Baltimore Roundtable for Economic Democracy. We're excited to have Rodney Foxworth with us as well. Rodney is CEO of Common Future, formerly known as DAWI, which is a network of entrepreneurial leaders working to advance equitable economic opportunities through entrepreneurship and local business ownership in marginalized communities throughout the US and Canada. And of course, we have Melissa Hoover. Melissa is the founding executive director at DAWI. She's a leader in the worker ownership movement and has been for over 15 years. She helped start and grow the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and she is an executive fellow of the Rutgers Institute for Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing. She's also a strategic advisor to foundations, investors, nonprofits, local governments, and other organizations who are interested in incorporating worker ownership into their economic development and community wealth building programs. And lastly, we have Shivanthi Daniel, who is the Senior Director of Programs at DAWI. Shivanthi provides strategic support on program implementation and growth for DAWI's conversion work with cities, technical assistance providers, legacy business owners, and consulting services. If you're just joining us, we're so excited to have you. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what organization you're from, where you're joining us from in the country. If you could turn off your audio and your video just to avoid any disruptions. And with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Shivanthi Daniel. Shivanthi.
Great, thanks, Julian. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be in this space with you all. My name is Shivanthi Daniel, and I'm the Senior Director, Program Director at Democracy at Work Institute. I'd like to share some insights of DAWI's journey this past year, 2021. It's been rough. DAWI announced a strategic refinement, focusing our work at a critical moment for small businesses and workers through a single campaign, Ownership Now for Equitable Recovery. Through the Ownership Now campaign, we've committed to moving with increased urgency, strategic focus, ambition, and in radically collaborative ways demanded by the current economic and social crisis, as well as the opportunities they present. We've identified 3 core areas of work based on our research experience of the needs of workers. These are to innovate for better livelihoods, helping our allies succeed, and unlocking ownership capital, which is what we're talking about today. Unlocking ownership capital is all about shifting capital to shift power. We're at a dynamic and exciting time for worker ownership. At this stage in the field, there is an exciting dialogue about the role of capital. In addition, there's a growing effort to move capital or to create new capital vehicles and to increase access to capital for existing worker-owned businesses. back in early 2021, DAWI committed to a capital-driven strategy for a few reasons. We believed that we were responding to the needs and opportunities in the field. We also believed that shifting capital to shift power is essential, particularly for implementing racial equity. And lastly, focusing on capital would help us design supports for business success and scale, which worker cooperatives often struggle to balance. So today, by sharing our strategy to unlock ownership capital in context with other efforts in the field, we hope to catalyze a conversation about capital and shared ownership. We want to build a collaborative effort at doing this. And there are three things that we want to really work on this coming year and the years to follow. One is to bring more equity capital to the world of shared capital ownership, bring more investors into the world of employee ownership, and mobilize public capital that will scale shared ownership. So with that said, first, let me start with how we got here. This past decade has seen an increase, a steady increase in the number and size of loan funds. Often these are CDFIs dedicated to providing capital for worker cooperatives. Many of these have taken innovative approaches to lending, and we'll hear from some of them today. There's been a tremendous growth in this space, and you can see the increase in loan funds. We estimate a conservative amount of capital invested in worker ownership owned businesses has increased about fivefold in the last 8 years. In the past, many capital discussions were focused on getting more loans to co-ops, right? Helping worker co-ops get loan ready, removing barriers that prevent co-ops from accessing loans, like personal guarantees, for example, with the SBA. This has been a long and hard, valiant fight to make more debt capital available to worker cooperatives. It is critical and important, and partners in the field have helped us move ahead in this regard with policy changes. But through these efforts, we've also learned the limits of lending. First, that worker cooperatives tend to be leery of debt and borrowing. Second, lender ratios and sometimes the constraints on CDFIs meant that some deals couldn't be financed. And finally, there just needed to be more risk capital, more equity across the board. So there's this new conversation, and that's what we're excited about today. It's not just about capital, it's really about financial equity and the kind of capital that creates ownership. This conversation is about how to expand ownership for people who haven't had it. Within the past 5 years, there has been an explosion of these efforts to create more risk capital to generate more equity investments. All these initiatives take existing tools and recombine them in new ways and apply different logic to them. Back in 2016, the Democracy Collaborative convened a group of field organizations to build an ambitious goal with a focus on capital. 50 million worker owners by 2050. And more recently, employee ownership and worker cooperative organizations have created a handful of equity vehicles to meet that need. And we're also seeing a growing interest among philanthropic investors and public capital. This movement around capital in the field is not just about financial equity, it's about racial equity as well. It's about transferring business assets to close the racial wealth gap, to benefit Black and Brown communities for whom equity and ownership has been stripped and extracted. What drives these recent initiatives is a framework that understands that racial equity cannot be achieved without the investment and redirection of financial equity. At DAWI, we've been listening to these conversations, taking part in them, and in some cases helping to lead them. And in early 2021, we made a conscious pivot in our work to focus on capital as a program area. So all of our programs use a methodology of demonstrate, enable, and embed. It is how we do our work. We demonstrate an innovative approach to a problem. We enable others to learn from our experience and perhaps replicate it by sharing our learnings. And we try to embed support for that innovative approach in institutions of influence and power, like government and education. So I'd like to share a little bit about the campaign to unlock ownership capital. The Legacy Business Fund is a demonstration of a new way of raising and deploying ownership capital for conversions. We're doing this with APHIS and Heritage Partners, an investment firm that we helped incubate. Late in 2018, DAWI's executive director, Melissa Hoover, DAWI staffer Todd Leverette, and his partner, Phil Reeves, sketched out the vision for A&H, the first and only Black-led investment fund for employee ownership conversions. We were fortunate to receive seed funding at that time from Candida Fund and City Community Development, and an incredible amount of support from Jeanne Wardford from Kellogg Foundation, who's with us today, to plan and launch an equity-like investment fund that would focus on racial equity and employee ownership. So after 18 months or so, the fund launched on Juneteenth, 2021, and now it's on track to close at 50 million. Several of its investors are social purpose investors and philanthropic foundations. The Legacy Fund will invest in businesses with majority workforces of color in essential industries, such as landscaping, infrastructure, and the care economy. This partnership was powerful for raising the fund, and it will be powerful for protecting and growing its investments. The second part of our approach is to enable others to uptake a capital strategy. This work will ramp up in the coming years. We will be documenting the impacts and lessons of the Legacy Fund and sharing them with the field. The Legacy Fund will also be hosting fellows who are early career financial professionals to learn about the model and methods. Beyond the Legacy Fund, DAWI will lead a capital working group within the Workers to Owners Collaborative, and will work together to develop models, tools, and trainings to help cooperative developers and managers more effectively make use of capital, including public funds and impact investors. The final part of our approach is to embed support for capital innovations in institutions. To that end, we are working hard on policy that will unlock public capital. At the federal level, we're part of a consortium of groups advocating for recovery funds to be made available for worker cooperatives, particularly in equity-like forms. We helped inform the State Small Business Credit Initiative, and we're talking with lawmakers and agencies like the USDA and SBA to explore what might be possible. There will be a flood of public capital in the coming years, and our goal is to capture some of that for employee ownership with a racial equity approach. So with all this said, we are not the first nor the only organization to focus more energy and attention on capital. As I shared earlier, there are more practitioners creating funds and other capital vehicles. Even more interestingly, we're seeing adjacent and partnered movements are also focusing on capital. We have some of those folks here today. With excitement and humility and also a little pride, we want to share the work and framework that is animating us today, and that is animating a lot of other movements who are also coming to the realization that without financial equity, there is no racial equity. So thank you for being here to learn with us. At this time, I'm excited to invite Todd Leverette and hand it off to you.
Chev, thank you so much. And thank you to the team at DAWI for hosting this webinar. Really excited to be on with you all today. And thanks for everybody who's joining today. As Chev was saying, my name is Todd Leverette, and I'm co-principal of Apis and Heritage Capital Partners. I send greetings on behalf of my co-principal, Phil Reeves, and our entire A&H team. They send their greetings and say thank you all. I'm excited to share with you today what Chev was just describing, go into a little bit more detail on Apis and Heritage Capital Partners and the Legacy Fund 1. And what the Legacy Fund 1 is really what we see as a reimagining of ownership and entrepreneurship in this country, using the tools of broad-based employee ownership, best in practice tools from the world of ESOPs and the world of co-ops, with a specific focus on where we believe the greatest need and opportunity for wealth building and quality work lies, which is communities of color. So what is Legacy Fund 1? It's essentially a mezzanine debt fund that really lives at the intersection of best-in-class private credit, best-in-class private equity, and the robust and long-standing world of employee ownership, specifically, again, utilizing the world of both ESOPs and co-ops. And essentially what the fund looks to do is buy great, small, closely held businesses and turn them into great, small, employee-owned firms that do several things. One, that outperform their peers. And as we all know, the research shows that employee-owned firms with employee-owned culture, employee-owner culture, they do outperform their peers. That create a cascade of benefits to the communities in which they live. They anchor and stabilize jobs in those communities, anchor and stabilize businesses in those states and those cities. And most importantly, that accrue a significant benefit to the workers, primarily in the terms of the opportunity to build wealth, to have their job connected to their long-term resilience and their family's long-term resilience through the buildup of wealth, while also creating quality jobs for those workers. So as Chev was mentioning before, to achieve this goal, I'll tell you, we originally started off with a goal of raising a $25 million fund to deploy in 8 to 10 small businesses. What has happened, as Chev noted, on Juneteenth of this year, we closed on $30 million of capital and are moving now in the direction of a final fund size of right around $50 million to, again, invest in 8 to 10 small businesses to impact at least 500 create 500 new worker owners, and to create wealth accumulation on average for those workers somewhere in the range of $70,000 to $120,000. So, you know, also while we're doing this, is also important to note that we're going to look to achieve all these you know, socially beneficial impact goals, while also ensuring that our helping ensure that our investors, the impact investors, the foundations, the high net worth individuals who invested capital into this fund and want to see impact, are also able to get competitive, properly risk-adjusted returns. And we can have a conversation about what that means. So, you know, in some ways we're preaching to the choir. You know, why does the country need a fund like this, and a lot of the other ownership funds that are out there right now? But, you know, I'm sure everybody is familiar with the racial wealth gap. The statistics around the racial wealth gap are actually what really was the impetus for this fund. As Chev was mentioning before, as serving as program manager of legacy business initiatives at DAWI, my goal was to help address the racial wealth gap for both business owners of color and workers of color using the models of employee ownership. Some of you may or may not know, as a business owner of color, the probability that you will sell your business and be able to pass on your business, especially if you take advantage of certain programs that benefit minority businesses, is significantly smaller than if you were not a business owner of color. So how can we find solutions for those owners? And then how can we find solutions for those workers and those communities and those cities? So, you know, the fact that the average white family has between 7 and 10 times the wealth of the average Black family, by some measures that could go up as high as 30 to 40 times, depending on what you're looking at as assets, really is the driving force behind this work, and doing it in a way that is scalable and that is sustainable within the market. So, you know, our current fund, Legacy Fund 1, is targeted at $50 million with a host of impact and foundational investors. What we hope to see a few years down the road for Legacy Fund 2 is to be able to tap into a lot of the institutional dollars that many of us or many of our families are actually invested in through public pensions, you know, public pension funds, insurance companies, and being able to tap into that larger pool of capital in order to really expand and scale up the investment opportunity and the impact. So, you know, while Fund 1 targets 500 workers, you know, we talked about, can we, over the course of 10 years, impact 5,000 workers or more, and move, you know, $500 million of capital over to workers instead of $50 million of capital. So, you know, the goal, the mission that you know, Melissa originally gave was find a way to scale this up for people of color. We sat down and came to the conclusion that capital was going to be the way that we're going to scale that up. The field had already done an excellent job at laying the groundwork, at finding the best practices for employee ownership, at establishing employee ownership centers to support the transitions and conversions of companies and support those companies going onward, putting out the research around best practices. And with that groundwork, we knew that we could go into the capital markets and pull in support, and that's exactly what's happened. So with that, I will, okay, I think I'm right at about time. I will go ahead and pause there, and I will go ahead and pass it over to someone who I've known for several years, and someone whom without we wouldn't be here right now, wouldn't be doing this work, Jeanne Wardford of the Kellogg Foundation.
Thank you, Todd. Well, now that's much too generous. When I actually came to this work, Melissa was really hard at work, beating the pavement. And so I just want to thank you all for including me in this discussion today. And Todd, as we were listening to your remarks, I had a question. Can you talk a little bit about what the impact of funding has been and what you needed to actually make this work, and how you think the market will support it?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. As I don't know if I mentioned before, or I think it may have been clear, is that we were able to incubate, to do this effort because of a mix of grant funding, and our role is starting off as a project at the Democracy at Work Institute, and through market facing investment capital that was also looking for impact as well as return. And the importance of one thing that Melissa and Phil and I, we all talked about early on, is making sure that we're putting out an investment model that could be self-sustaining. So once you're able to raise the capital, once you're able to make the investments in employee ownership would be able to sustain the ongoing fund structure. So is there enough capital there to keep it going? And we have been able to create a fund structure and investment structure that supports itself. Like any private credit, private equity fund out there, how they're able to support it themselves. Where the grant capital was key and integral was in the incubation stage of the process. The world of raising investment capital from a private equity fund, oftentimes there are many barriers to entry to folks who aren't coming directly out of investment banking, aren't coming directly out of another fund, or don't have a large amount of personal capital that's needed, where they can take a year and a half, 2 years, and develop their investment model, their investment thesis, build out the back office, and actually go out and raise the capital. Neither myself or Phil had the personal wealth, or we weren't coming directly out of those backgrounds where we were able to take that time and actually develop the model. So what DAWI, being a project of DAWI, enabled us to do is enable us to kind of take this idea and really run it to ground and go deep and dig deep into the world of how do we connect this world up with the world of investment capital. And that's where this would not have happened otherwise. So we're big supporters of the idea of nonprofit enterprises, foundations, finding teams who are willing to run with these really impactful models and impactful methods, and giving them the space and the time and the support and the resources that they need to make it into something that's investable by the broader market. So the grant funding was absolutely necessary, and we're big evangelists of using grant funding to create these enterprises that can really go once they're set up. Thanks for the question, Jeanne.
Oh, yeah, that's really great. And it just sort of leads me into talking really about how the Kellogg Foundation actually began to enter into this particular space. So about, God, it's been almost 7 years ago. When I started at the foundation, there was this book on my desk called The Citizen Share. And I was instructed to read several chapters in it. And it would prove very interesting. And it had some ideas in it that I wasn't sure whether I, fully maybe understood or even agreed with. But it was an interesting concept. And so along the way, what we decided is that there was not enough of the research in the field actually to figure out if this really benefited low to moderate income workers, and many of who have small children, and the children that the Kellogg Foundation really cares about. And so we worked with Rutgers University and did publish one of the first research projects that actually showed that this was a very promising model, that this really could have an impact and help families begin to build generational wealth. And so it actually has been a very exciting journey, because along the way, we've had partner foundations like Diane Eyes at the Candida Fund, who, has been very supportive of this work. And she's listened to me talk about this, and she's worked really very hard to, be a strong partner in supporting how we move this work forward. Because what we have found is that this is a model that really does work, that can unlock capital and wealth for poor families, and it can help to move the needle along the racial wealth gap. But requires partnerships. We know that, both public and private, to make this happen. And so so that has been where we've been spending the bulk of our time at the foundation, and determining how we can really deepen the partnerships that exist, but also being able to help educate municipalities about how this particular economic model could benefit them as a state, benefit their cities and their counties all across the country. And DAWI has played a really lead role in doing that. And so we're really excited to see how over the next, the last 5 years, this actually has grown, where we're seeing the opening of employee ownerships all across the country. Folks are getting it. Cities like New York are saying we'll provide technical support through actual and financial support to really support this business model. And so what we really are hoping is that efforts like DAWI is doing, incubating funds, is something that's really going to catch on, that the momentum is going to continue to grow. These organizations, and particularly DAWI, who has been one of the leading experts in educating individuals and government around this work, they play a key role in terms of making sure that the cultural competencies are met. Because what we know is that when we're doing this work on the ground, involving the people who are on the ground, who are closest to the work, we know that it's sustainable. And I think the one thing that really is really key for us now is that the pandemic actually uncovered a lot of things that we in the nonprofit world already knew. But now everybody knows that how fragile ecosystems are. We also knew, based on the study out of Boston, that out of their Center for Wealth and Philanthropy, that there is going to be a big transfer of wealth. Something like $57 trillion is going to change hands. And social scientists and people who are doing social good believe that the people who are going to be inheriting this money from this great transfer of wealth, we're going to really look to do social good with the money. And so what we've learned, and particularly have learned over the last couple of years, is that we might have had on rose-colored glasses when we were thinking that. Because what it appears when we look at the moves from Wall Street is that they are just doubling down on what their ancestors did, or wherever they got their wealth from. They're just doubling down because they want to ensure continued wealth in their family. I mean, we looked at it and said, what does this really mean? So what it means is that if you have $1 trillion and you spend $1 million every day, that you will have money for 2,700 years. And so, we know that $57 trillion is a lot of money. We know that when we see them going in to acquire businesses, that their business model, unlike ours, is to extract the wealth, because that's what they're structured to do. They extract wealth and then they give the wealth to their investors. And so what employee ownership is doing is that leaving that wealth in communities, with families, with children. And we think that really is very, very important. It's like people are now beginning to understand that if they invest in an employee ownership model, that those jobs will stay there. Those jobs will be in the community. that people will continue to have opportunities to have increased wages and have access to retirement funds. And so this has just been a wonderful opportunity to work with organizations, and particularly with DAWI, because of not only their progressive thinking, but also their leadership that they have had in the field. And so we're just so excited, and we're continuing to look for ways to build momentum, invite partners into the fold to support this work, because we know building the capacity on the nonprofit side is also important, because we have to continue to educate. And we're up against, trillions of dollars when we talk about what this fight is really to help people who live in poverty. And so excited to be a part of this work. I think the Apis and Heritage Fund is really exciting. And I know I'm out of time, but you guys know me, you know how much I talk. So I'm going to wind up, but I want to say congratulations to Apis and Heritage for, they started out with an initial fund of looking at 25, and now they're at 50, and the people are really investing in this. So we believe that this will work. And so we need all the partners, both public and private, to get on board. And we're encouraging philanthropy, continue to support this work and build up their support as we go along. So congratulations to you on this work. And we look forward to, seeing how we can begin to help continue to grow this fund. And I'm going to turn it over to Rodney Foxworth.
Actually, we're going to go over to Khatib first.
Oh, we're going over to Kate? Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay. So that also shows that I probably need to have my reading glasses on. But hey, Rodney, how you doing? Kate, I'm so sorry. Kate.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Jeanne. And thank you for all of the work that you're doing. The support of the Kellogg Foundation has been really transformative for the larger national cooperative ecosystem. And I know that you have been at the heart of that. And I wanted to ask you, could you talk a little bit more about what you see as the opportunities that are out there to help business owners and community members and other funders understand the value of shared ownership, either by making capital or other kinds of resources available?
So I think that there are a couple things at play here. One of the really big things is that, we have individuals and organizations who are working on the policy side, really sort of drive change. We had the Main Street Ownership Act. And now I think we're positioning, and with really, knowledge and a little pressure, actually going to see some regulatory change to actually implement that and make that happen within the SBA. So I think that's really an exciting thing that's happening. And then also something new that is coming is around in the educational scene. So out of the School of Labor and Management with Rutgers University, they are going to be teaching an online program, which is going to be free to educate African-American business owners and other small business owners on the value of converting their businesses to employee ownership. And it's going to be offered free of charge all across the country. And we think that that's going to be really sort of monumental, because education really is a part of the key, helping those business owners really understand how they can have a legacy, and then they can also have access to capital to lead to their heirs. And so we think that that's really important. So we're excited about those two opportunities, and particularly the role that DAWI has played in each of those.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's exciting. And it's something that that I think has been a challenge for a long time is really this question of raising awareness, helping people to understand what worker-owned cooperatives are, and especially helping capital providers to understand what cooperatives are, how they're different, how the financing has to be different. my entry point to doing this work was actually as a worker owner in a cooperative that was struggling to get access to financing. We'd been around for a decade and we were looking to expand, and banks did not understand how to work with us. We didn't have a lot of personal assets. We were a lot of workers without personal wealth, without a lot of personal assets to put on the line. And especially banks did not want to deal with a group of 12 equal owners. There simply was not a structure in place to deal with us. And so we ended up doing a lot of education. We ended up doing a lot of scrambling. We ended up doing a lot of hustling to be able to fund our project and move it forward. And when we got to the other side of that and we were expanded and we were becoming successful, we really sat down as a group of workers together, both within our business and the other worker-owned cooperatives in Baltimore, which is where I'm based. And we said, this is not going to work. We're not going to be able to grow. Other businesses like us are not going to be able to grow unless there are capital solutions that are designed really specifically to support us. And so we partnered together with organizations all around the country to create a national financial cooperative that eventually became what's known now as Seed Commons. So Seed Commons is a national investment fund. We take money in through a central fund. So like Todd was talking about, we're trying to figure out how we can aggregate our need to be able to bring in investment from the capital market. And then we deploy that capital through a network of locally rooted partners. So instead of being one big investment fund that's based in New York City, so we were built on the architecture of a fund that was already in New York called the Working World. And instead of continuing to grow the Working World and deploying capital through that central node, instead what we did was say, let's actually take a kind of train the trainer approach. So instead of having project officers or program officers that are supporting co-ops all around the country, let's actually work with cooperatives and workers and communities to figure out how to build the infrastructure to support locally rooted investment funds and to provide technical assistance to help fuel and support the growth of worker-owned cooperatives. And that's been an interesting process. It's grown quite a bit. We started in 2015 with a roughly $10 million fund. Now we are just about to push ahead of 40 million. There are 30 funds in our network, all spread around the country. And they grow at different paces based on their ecosystem and based on the cooperatives and the kind of capital that they need. So my fund in Baltimore that I work with has just, I think, invested just over $5 million in 10 businesses in Baltimore City. And hoping to continue to grow at that pace. And, you know, we talked, Jeanne was just talking about the incredible extractive economy that is really at the heart of the capital and credit system in the United States. And what we've tried to do is to build a model of what we call non-extractive finance. So we've tried to think about how do you invest in cooperative businesses in a way that doesn't replicate those same structures, that does not extract wealth from workers, does not extract wealth from businesses that are not stable. And for us, that it looks different in different cases, but there are a few core principles. One of the most important ones for us is that all of the repayment of our investments come out of net profit. So we make loans, but our loans are structured in a way that works a little bit more like equity. So to give you an example, my business had loans from Seed Commons, from our local node in Seed Commons. And when the COVID crisis shut us down in March of 2020, we didn't have to scramble to refinance our loans, to come up with new contracts, to figure out how to restructure things. Other lenders across the country were scrambling to figure out, do we have to extend repayment terms? Do we have to change monthly payments? Are our businesses going to go into default on these loans? Our loan contracts and our investments are structured in a way that expect that payments are going to expand and contract based on the health of the business. If the business isn't generating net profits, if the business is not healthy enough to pay its workers, to pay its overhead, to be truly sustainable and on a growth trajectory, then that business is not ready to start making that investment repayment. So it gives us a lot of expandability. It gives us a way to weather the different kinds of economic storms that small businesses are dealing with, even when we're not in a crisis moment, as we have been in the past couple of years. And for us, that also extends to the investor side. So the way that we structure the investment into the fund is really similar. We don't guarantee a particular rate of return to the investors. We target rates of return, but ultimately the return to the investors is based on the health of the portfolio overall. And what we found is that impact investors, foundations that are looking to support this kind of economic growth in worker-owned and community-controlled businesses have been happy to work with us and have been able to work with these different kinds of terms that at the beginning seem a little bit surprising, or like things that are out of the ordinary. For us, it really makes sense. It's a total process of thinking about non-extraction at the co-op level, at the investment level, and also in the way that we distribute those funds throughout our network of partners. And I think I am just at time now. So I will pass it off to Rodney Foxworth from Common Future, who I am very happy to see.
Very happy to see you as well, Kate. It's always wonderful to be in conversation with folks from Baltimore. I am now back in my hometown of Baltimore, so I'm super excited about that. And also want to congratulate you, Kate, on the Washington Post article that just came out, highlighting the efforts that you've really been a tremendous leader on and an agitator for good around cooperative ownership in the city. I have a question for you that I think oftentimes comes up for many folks. So in the distributed model that Seed Commons has, how does decision-making work? Who decides if an investment even moves forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I love, because the answer to it is that Seed Commons is organized and makes decisions as a cooperative. So like any cooperative entity, decisions are made by the members. The members of Seed Commons are the individual, locally rooted funds that are often led by communities, community organizers, groups of workers working together. And as they move through the infrastructure of Seed Commons, as they build their capacity to make loans and investments in co-ops and other community-controlled enterprises in their cities and regions, they move into different stages of membership. Once they become full members of Seed Commons, they have a seat on our National Credit Committee. And it's that National Credit Committee that works together with the local, project officers to figure out how to best structure those investments. So it's nice. It's cooperative at all the different levels.
That's fantastic. Thank you again, Kate, for everything that you do. And actually such a great segue into the work of Common Future as well, because decision-making is so integral to this conversation about access to capital for ownership and really about control of capital as well, which I think, Kate, you just so wonderfully articulated the importance of that. And so there's a lot of things that Common Future does, but I'm going to take the opportunity today to speak more specifically to the character-based lending fund that we've developed over the past year. It's a pilot, and it really was a pilot in response to the understanding that for so many institutions that are predominantly and are led by folks of color that have been extracted from over many centuries, decades, years, that there's not just a challenge around access to capital, but even when there is access to capital, how do decisions on deployment and allocation of capital, how does it happen? Who gets to actually have decision-making authority and power in that process? And so at the beginning of the pandemic, as we all know, or most of us are very acutely aware of, the economic fallout disproportionately impacted communities of color and entrepreneurs, small businesses of color, to the degree in which we already understood historically and in our contemporary time prior to the pandemic that it was such a economic situation that was precarious for so many entrepreneurs and small businesses owned and led by folks of color, particularly in places that are majority people of color. And one of the things that we'd had so much conversation with institutions in our network, in the Common Future Network, which are place-based institutions that provide services and support to small businesses and entrepreneurs. These are small business and entrepreneur support institutions. These are smaller place-based community development financial institutions. These are community investment funds, community loan funds, et cetera, that are across the US. But as we were having conversations with so many of them, one of the things that was quite obviously a systemic barrier that we were really aware of, I think many of us are aware of this, was that those institutions that are most proximate to entrepreneurs and small businesses, the ones that are actually doing the hard work of ensuring that small businesses and entrepreneurs have the resources that they need to be successful and to create positive impact in their communities, were so far removed from financial capital and equity. These are institutions that oftentimes larger institutions, larger banks and financial institutions would come to them for advice, to pick their brain on how to deploy resources and capital into communities. And yet the institutions that we predominantly work with in the Common Future Network did not have much control, let alone access to those financial resources directly. So this has obviously been a long-standing problem. And one of the opportunities that we were afforded was to work with a group of institutions, just three, predominantly women of color-led institutions in the Midwest and also in the Southwest that work mostly with Indigenous and Black entrepreneurs to really develop a shared financial infrastructure in which those institutions would actually have the decision-making authority and the capital resources to deploy directly into their communities. And so you can see what a wonderful segue this is from what Kate shared about the work of Seed Commons. And one of the things that enabled us to do this as an institution at Common Future, we had a really particular role to play. One, we were the lead investor. And the reason this is important is because as an institution, we were able to utilize our own capital to be the first dollars in for this shared financial infrastructure. So that's one critical piece, was that as an institution, we had some resources that we could deploy as we saw fit. And then second, we really were sort of the quarterback for the shared financial instrument, this development, in which we really worked with each of the institutions to set the terms that they wanted to set as it relates to the type of capital, the loan terms, et cetera. We as an institution completely allowed for those organizations to set those terms. We believe that it's about sharing power as much as possible. And so sharing that decision-making power to set the terms was really critically important for us. And we actually worked with them to ensure that they had the sort of technical capabilities in partnership with Common Future. We were able to leverage our resources in terms of legal support, developing that out, our financial administrative capabilities, and bringing in other institutions as partners that would be able to serve in particular roles, again, really at the following the lead of these institutions. So we put up our own capital, and then as an institution, Common Future then went out to raise additional co-investment from foundations, high net worth individuals, and sort of philanthropic collaboratives, that we were able to raise this sort of a hybrid mix. And this was spoken to earlier about APIS and Heritage. We utilized a combination of grant capital, 0% interest as well, interest loans as well, to create an integrated capital pathway that we could really provide to three institutions that make up the shared financial infrastructure. And so this was an opportunity for Common Future as an institution to put up its own capital, really demonstrate for, and I love how DAWI goes about this, to really demonstrate for other institutions, particularly foundations and investors, the importance of being that risk capital, that quote unquote risk capital, to really put to bear, to bring those resources and share those resources on behalf of institutions that have been excluded from the capital markets and from the decision-making process more broadly. And so that has been really the opportunity that we've had with the character-based lending fund. And with that, I know I'm at time, so I'm going to hand back to Shevanthi.
Well, gosh, Rodney, I think what you just described is such a powerful model, and it really is innovative. You've been a critical leader in sort of engaging in this dialogue. I want to ask you a question before we move off of your organization. Is in your sort of innovative model, how are investors' interests represented, and how do you bring them to the table?
It's such a great question. And quite frankly, this is, again, going back to Shevanthi, think about that question around sharing power. We really had to be thoughtful and deliberate about the type of investors that we wanted to bring into the table. We oftentimes talk about, access to capital, but it's also the right type of capital, right? Whose values are really aligned with really implementing the vision set forth by the institutions that we're working with. And so fortunately, we had established some longstanding relationships with a number of foundations and investors to really bring this opportunity to them. And when you talk about when we ask the questions about the investors' interest, we really wanted to make sure that we're highlighting and prioritizing the interests of the impacted communities, and really leveraging the character-based lending fund as an opportunity to also build long-term risk capital and equity for these institutions that are participating. So what Todd was speaking to earlier, that equity gap, that financial equity gap, we wanted to leverage the character-based lending fund as an opportunity to also build equity into those institutions. And so we really found ourselves working with really like-minded investors that understood the opportunity in hand. And again, creating the integrated capital approach was really important. Also, the one thing I'd also point out too, in this, or re-emphasizing, was the fact that Common Future was able to put up its own money, I think actually was able to bring in other co-investors, because we were able to signal to them that this is really an opportunity that we fully believe in. We're putting our money where our mouth is, right? And I think that was really helpful. And I think that speaks to some of the importance of that conversation about shifting power to shift capital. If you're an institution that's positioned to be able to exercise those values in the same way that DAWI, C-Commons, and others are shared today, then do that, right? Because it really does help to bring people off the sidelines.
That's great, Rodney. Thank you so much for joining us and adding to this work. I'd like to introduce Melissa Hoover, our Executive Director, to say a few final words. Thanks, Melissa.
Yes, thank you, Shevanthi. So I really want to thank Shevanthi Daniel, Senior Director of Programs at DAWI, who is my and our partner in crime on the Legacy Fund from the beginning. She left that part out of her introduction, but Shevanthi was there at the beginning with the vision and has supported the implementation of the Legacy Fund all the way through. And what I like about Shevanthi is she likes to break the rules and remake the rules. And that's actually what I like about all of our guests here. They are breaking the rules. Everyone is so smart and so creative and so innovative. And so I want to thank them one by one and sort of draw out some of the high points of their presentations as I heard them. Sort of the general arc for me is that everybody here today is using tools creatively. You know that old saw about like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think that's if you're uncreative and you have a hammer. I feel like our guests have a hammer and they use it to prop up the bookcase. They use it to pull the nail out of the wall. They use it all kinds of ways because they refuse to accept that the hammer of finance can only be used to hit the nail of building wealth for majority communities. They're using that hammer in all kinds of really interesting ways. So we've got Rodney and Common Future insisting that partner organizations set the terms and using an integrated capital pathway. That's breaking all the rules. We have Khatib and the Seed Commons using the pull and profile of a national organization to support local deployment that's controlled by the community. So getting big by staying small in a way, by staying local, and expanding and contracting payment terms. That's the number one rule that's broken, and they're growing by doing that. We've got Jeanne insisting on a research-based approach, right? To sort of ask the real hard question of, is employee ownership benefiting communities of color and low and moderate income workers? Not just sort of accepting that that's gonna be the case, but insisting that we get the data behind it. And then we've got the APIS and Heritage folks and Todd Leverette sort of demonstrating what can happen when you start from that question and have time to sit down and actually craft an approach that's based in racial equity, that takes into account essential industries and focuses on sustainability of the solution. So in each case, each of our presenters is asking a better question than the one that was asked before and getting a better answer. And the real kind of central question is, how can shared ownership forms and employee ownership and the capital that supports it be used to advance racial equity, to right some of the wrongs of this country? These are all new questions, unfortunately, in the world of employee ownership, relatively new questions. And so the answers are establishing new rules for capital, new rules for how to aggregate and deploy it, and for practitioners in the field. So I think we're in a really rich time of great innovation that's driven by asking the right questions and solving for the right things, re-envisioning how we're going to use that hammer. So my gratitude to all of the presenters and to my colleagues at DAWI for this collaborative approach to providing solutions for workers. We cannot do it alone. And when you have 5, 10, dozens of rule breakers all getting together to rewrite the rules, that's systems change. So I'll leave you all with that, with my deep gratitude for sharing your wisdom and your risk-taking with us today.
Thank you for joining us today, everyone. DAWI invites you to work with us, to learn with us, and make progress for workers together as we pursue ownership now for equitable recovery. Email Shivanti, whose email is in the chat. Shivanti, if you can put your email in the chat, that'd be great. And you can reach out to her to engage directly. Also, we have just released the municipal playbook for employee ownership with our partner, the National League of Cities. Please read the paper today. You can follow the bit.ly link in the chat. It is case sensitive, so capital M, capital P, when you type in that URL. It's also in the chat. And we're super appreciative of everyone who joined us today, especially our guests, Rodney, Todd, Kate, Jeanne, Shivanti, and Melissa, of course. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.